My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Siva Sankaran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to cover Mahan's, from Mahan's I Got book, the 8th principle, which is air. We covered in the last time, we covered the atoms and water and earth, and in all of that, I spoke about how all of this come from this, our universe, and and within the universe, you've got the material identity and material composition, but also embedded in it, there is this divine qualities and characteristics that are embedded in it. And I made the reference of how our body is made out of matter and energy, and within the matter and energy we have, it gives us form and substance and three-dimensional body with time built in, a four-dimensional being. And having said that, even though our body is four-dimensional, with space and time, within that we have a substratum which is transcendental to both the space and time. It has infinite potential and possibilities, and also it's dimensionless, formless, colorless, and transcendental to all material forms and substance. So we have both the spiritual body and also the material body. And the same imprint, we saw that in the atoms and water and earth and so on. And today I'm going to speak about air. And here Swamiji lists, put it down as the 8th principle. And here he speaks about the air as, coming from earth, and, earth has a physical body, and we have atoms, and, the atoms come together to form various, molecules, which consist of what we call air molecules. And he says that the waves of such atoms constitute the air. So what that means is that the building blocks of these molecules, from basic molecules, we know oxygen, we know carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and all these things are basic building blocks of this universe. And as they swirl and coerce and come together and form, more complex molecules, we see that oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and many other, composition that make up this air. And you'll see that in this song, he speaks about why this is really important. And he says that, it is everywhere in space, and, it's everywhere in our, on earth, in every direction. And here he says that, in different altitude, the behavior or the characteristics of the air is very, very different. And I'll touch on that. And he also says about the power of the air. We know that air has tremendous power. From air, we can derive energy. Air gives you weather patterns. Air leads to clouds and rain, and so we see that air is really critical in our material world, and there is some divine characteristics that I'll touch on. So just to define what air is, bringing everybody up to speed, it may look like a science class, but actually behind the science there's so much spirituality. So here, as I mentioned, the air consists of air molecules. It has mass, so there is a pull of gravity. So the gravity does impact, and the weight of that, because of it has mass, that we see that it has weight and air pressure, and this has an impact on our body, and you'll see that how this air pressure has brings harmony, and if there is no harmony in this pressure points, we see that the body can be not in harmony, the mind can be disturbed, and so on. So we see that understanding the atmosphere, the air around us, and how we use the air is very important. We know that the air pressure is equal in all directions, and in different altitude, the behavior is very different. In higher altitude, the pressure is very low. That's why we see that when the aircraft is traveling at a very high level, they have to pressurize the cabin because there's less pressure in the air. And the same, as you go lower, the pressure becomes really high, especially when you go under the sea. You see that the weight of the water and others becomes so intense, the pressure becomes very, very intense. That's why we see that the submarines and others need to have very strong shell, right? So in that same way, you'll see that this high altitude and low altitude has got very important spiritual dimension in all of us. And we see that these air molecules are very important for life, because without air, we would not be able to breathe. And you'll see that, in many people who have respiratory problems, and particularly, during the COVID time, you see that even though the air is coming through, the body is not absorbing the air. And this is where you see that fluids start forming and people have difficulty breathing. And many people literally drown while living. So this is where we see that air molecules and how the body absorbs it, and how, if we harmonize our body through meditation, and various yoga practices, how the flow of air becomes much more harmonized with the needs of the body and the mind. So here in this eighth principle, Mahan speaks about, in all this, Mahan's philosophy, he talks about the harmony between nature and harmony between us. When there is disharmony, we see that the body also becomes, less harmonious. When the body becomes less harmonious, the body, gets sick, disease, and when that happens, the mind and the intellect too are impacted. So acquisition of wisdom becomes more challenging. So here, for all of your, for your own knowledge, you should know that the earth, the atmosphere we have has got important component, oxygen, which makes up about 21%, nitrogen is about 78%, and of course we have all the other molecules in the air. And we also see that if the air is pristine, we get high quality intake of oxygen and various other components. But if the air has a lot of pollution, you see that we also absorb many of the pollution, and some of them are not very good for the body. And we see that sometimes the body is triggered with all kinds of ailments when you have things that are not supposed to be in the air and not, it's not an important substance for the body. It could be quite harmful. So again, the issue of how we look after the environment is very important. And that is why you see that most spiritual people are very nature-centric. They try to be as harmonious as possible with nature. So here we see that, because of all the economic activities and because a lot of, unaffected industrial activities, pollution, and all the, the transport, carbon, we release a lot of pollutants in the air. And we see that today we have higher incidence of all kinds of diseases. So here, the composition of the air is really important on how we manage our own way of life. So we see that we are actually our body is constructed of the elements of the universe, and every breath that we take is that we are taking the breath of the universe within us. And every breath, the universe, part of universe goes in to build our body. And every, when we breathe out, we are releasing back what was percolating from outside, and it brings out all the toxins in the form of air molecules too. So, and what we gain from the universe, we release it back to the universe. And interestingly, that what we release, which is toxin for us, is a sustenance for other biological beings. So we see that as we breathe oxygen that is released in the atmosphere by plants and other green things, it goes in, and the oxygen is very important for us to, nourish our blood. The oxygen is very important to, for cell growth and repairing of the cell, and also all the various biochemical activities, and also the flow of electricity and so on. So we see that what we breathe, particularly all the air molecules that are very important to nourish our body, and in the nourishment, some of the toxin within our body is released back out for others to use it as sustenance. So we have this beautiful flow of the universe that is passing through our body, nourishing our brains. And also you'll see that when our body and my brain is nourished, the mind becomes more alert. The mind becomes more calmer. The mind becomes more sharper. The intellect becomes really, really intensive. So we see that, this air is actually part and parcel of us. When, this is why we see that Mahan and others say that when we take a deep breath, we take the breath of the universe. When we release it, we release back that universe. And there's a seamless flow, a dance of the universe, around us, within us, between us, and it's the seamless thread that keeps that beautiful dance of that universe, resonating. And this is really important, and this is why you see that in some of the meditational sadhana, the breath is a very important part of this meditation, because it actually connects us to that flow of this external and the internal cosmos, and it connects the two. So we see that our breath is a very important component. I'll come back to some of the divine characteristics of air and the process of using air, that flow of the air, to give us that sense of calm, sublimity, and the sense of oneness with nature. So we see that, this practice of breathing, most people take it for granted. And many people don't breathe properly. And in that process, you see that most people, their breath is a very short breath. It is not a diaphragmatic breath where the lungs are fully occupying the air molecules. So even breathing, there is a technique. There's a technique called Ujjayi breathing. There's also this diaphragmatic breathing where we take a deep breath and we hold it for a while to allow the air molecules to percolate, be absorbed completely, so in a very deep breath, and we stop for a while, and then we have a deep, breathing outside. So we bring out the entire toxin. And you can actually see this, I'm not sure how many of you all have an oximeter. If you have an oximeter, sometimes the oxygen level will fluctuate between 92, 93, 94, 95. But you put on the oximeter and you take a deep breath and you hold it for a short while, suddenly you see the oximeter goes up to 98, 99, sometimes hits 100, 98, 99, it bounces. So what's that telling you is that when we learn to breathe slowly, deeply, and hold it, we see that our body gets the nourishment that is needed. In that nourishment, the blood is full of oxygen. We see that the heart, the stress on the heart is much more lower. And you see that, the brain recognizes that the heart doesn't have to beat much more faster. So there is a beautiful science here that, whenever we learn to take deep breath, right, we see that our heart becomes more calmer because the brain recognizes it. And we see that when we don't breathe properly, we see that the heart has to work harder because your lung is only filling up about 40 or 50%. So which means that your body is only getting 40 to 50% of the oxygen. So which means that the heart has to pump much more faster to get the oxygen in, get the carbon dioxide out, so it's working much more harder than actually you can, make it the capacity of the heart. So when that happens, you see that the brain also has to work over time in terms of making sure that the hormones are sent properly, so there's a, interesting dynamics between our breath, the oxygen level in our body, the heart that needs that signal, and the brain that is continuously working to make sure that the heart is beating. And this is continuously happens, and you see that the blood pressure starts going up, right? So we start seeing, people's, they get palpitation and all those things. Another interesting thing that happens also is that, which is, when people are stressed, or when people are, suddenly something is happening that they didn't anticipate, suddenly the heart starts palpitating and beating. It's because the biggest user of oxygen is actually the brain. So when something happens, the brain cannot understand what this is or trying to find a solution to it. So the brain is using a lot of, it needs a lot of energy. So it's sending signals, which means hormones, to the heart to start pumping more blood, because it needs more energy to process this information that is coming in. So this is why we see that whenever somebody is panicking, or when somebody has panic attack, we say, okay, sit down, take a deep breath, and when you take a deep breath, you see that the oxygen now, instead of pumping, it's now modulated to get more oxygen, and you become more and more calmer. So when you become more calmer, we see that, you can think more rationally, more carefully, and so on. So this breath is a very integral part of, ensuring our mind is more calmer, more peaceful, and so on. This is not just when you have panic attack or when you have something happening, but this, if you did this properly every day in the morning, every day, when you're going for your walk, or every time when you're there, you are conscious of your breathing is a deep, long breath. You see that always you'll have a very calm, cool, composure, because the brain is now not overworked. The brain knows, okay, we have all the oxygen there, the energy there to utilize it. So there's a bank of oxygen there that enables the brain to use that energy effectively to make decisions better. So we see this breathing, although we take it for granted, it is a very fundamental aspect of our human biology and the health of the body, health of the brain and the mind. So we see that there are divine quality of the air, and as I mentioned, the quality of the air is divine. The air flows seamlessly, right? There's a seamless flow. As long as we are alive, our breath is seamlessly flowing, So here, Swamiji says a very nice quote. He says, restless is blood circulation, eternal is nature, none is permanent, is material, for I is the origin of all. So what he's saying is that the seamless flow, the omnipresence of these air molecules in our atmosphere, and also the seamless flow between the external and the internal, gives the mind a sense of beautiful harmony, right? And while physiologically there is the harmony, there is also a divine quality of the air that also gives the mind that seamless flow. For the body needs energy, right? And if the body gets the energy, the mind is able to acquire its energy, called the wisdom knowledge. So the mind now realizes this beautiful resonance and beautiful harmony. The mind too realizes that it has got this immense, jnana or wisdom knowledge from this cosmos, which is abundant. It is transcendental to the material knowledge that we have. And when the seamless flow of that universal knowledge, which passes through the mind and intellect, the mind becomes inspired, the mind expands, and we see that the beautiful flow is how the air flows from the inner cosmos to the external cosmos. The mind too captures that flow of that universal knowledge and the knowledge that is needed in this material world. So while living in this limited material world, they live in an unlimited way. While being in this mortal body, the mind becomes immortal. While the body is perishable, the mind becomes imperishable. So this is why, that when one understands this beautiful flow of this air that nourishes the body, the mind too captures the same divine flow from that universal cosmos. The second aspect is actually we see that the air is very important to sustain life. In that same way, we see that air is what sustains the life force. Without the air, you would not have, blood nourished. Without the air, you see that the electrical currents or the neural connectivity would not be there. And we see that without the air, we see that, the Kundalini Shakti or the life force would not be strong. So this is where we see that, as how air sustains life, and this life force, the life force sustains our connection to this greater uh, consciousness or substratum within us. The third aspect is actually about, as I spoken about, that when we are able to breathe properly, when we are able to have the deeper breath, there's a calming experience that takes place. And I explained to you why we get the calming and soothing experience. Whenever you have a challenging moment, or whenever you have something that is really difficult, sit down quietly and take deep breath. Besides meditation, you take deep breath and you see that we get the nourishment of the, within our blood system, carries through the brain. The brain has enough resources now to operate in, much more complex environment, to pick up the subtleties to overcome those solutions. And you see that calming experience is really important to give you that fourth dot point, which is quietude of the mind. The mind that becomes more calmer, cooler, less volatile, a sense of serenity, a sense of quietude that dawns upon the mind. When that happens, the mind is not impacted by all the forces of this material universe. All the experiences are, you attain that beautiful harmony. So in that quietude, you can actually feel the flow of the breath, the seamless flow of the breath. In that quietude of the mind, you can seamlessly, touch that nectar of the universal wisdom knowledge. The mind just becomes inspired because it becomes connected. So we see that the four key dot points, are important, where air and the way we breathe are really crucial. The second aspect, which the divine quality of the air, is that it is really powerful, though you don't see it. When the air builds up, it can be really, really powerful. You get whirlwinds, you get storms and hurricanes that picks up that speed. And you see that when the air speed picks up and it intensifies, one, it can give you a lot of energy. So a lot of the solar renewable energy comes from air itself, but also it can be powerful in destroying many things. So air is very important for giving life, for sustaining, and also for dissolving. In that same way, we see that if the mind is able to understand that it is made out of this air molecules, ultimately the blood, all are air molecules, the neural pathway, the electrical currents are all air molecules. So basically what we see is that we are air, standing on air, in air. And given that, we see that the mind that understands this power will imbibe the qualities of the air. It sustains life. It's got that beautiful flow between internal and external cosmos. It's got that sustains life, the life force. It's got a calming and cool. It's able to quiet down everything, but it also has the power. It has the power to create energy. It's got the power to dissolve many things. And the last dot point, which is the characteristics of the air, is actually agility. See, air has this beautiful quality of agile. You know, the flow of air is going in a particular direction. Suddenly there's a building, or suddenly something is blocking it. The air doesn't stop. It'll go, it'll break up and follow around it and then join back. So what we see here is that the air has this agility, and when the mind understands this natural force of air is part and parcel of its own beingness, the mind could also imbibe the DNA of the air, that it's got a flow, it's got a direction, it's got a purpose. And we see that many hindrances would come, but it'll know how to flow around it. It'll know how to go between it. It'll know how to transcend it and still go back to its direction. And I always see this as a very important quality of the air. And I was, amazed by some of the descriptions given in some scriptures that talk about how they depict this, god of wind, that is able to transcend many hindrances. We also have epic stories of great characters that actually can fly in the air and transcend many material forces. In that same way, these deities and these characters were given to tell us that we have this quality of air. We can be flexible. We have the seamless flow, the connectivity to everything. It can sustain life. We have the beautiful, calming, cooling experience that creates a sublimity and calmness to acquire that wisdom knowledge. It has the power and the flow, and it also has that agility to absorb, assimilate, and also, transcend any hindrances. So I see that, this divine quality of air, as I meditate upon it, I say, wow, the mind becomes, fluid in the sense that it becomes seamless. It's one, and it is got this flexibility and agility to overcome any challenges and discover that expansiveness of its knowledge and treasure. And this is what I learned from Mahan's teaching when I read this, the air-like quality, and I'll talk about an example of a great deity called Hanuman, which essentially was born of, this is a kind of an epic story that people say that he is born of, his father is actually Vayu. Vayu is actually air. And during crisis, when nobody could do it, one of the saints said, look, let the son of Vayu, air, transcend this difficult challenges and fly and discover, this great treasure that was lost. Particularly, it's Sri Rama's wife. He says he's able to transcend this space and time because he's the son of the air, and is able to transcend. Those days there were no aeroplanes and other things, right? So it's able to transcend, to be able to discover what is lost. In that same way, as I was reading that epic and as I was reading Mahan's book, what this lesson tells us is that no matter what the challenges are, no matter what the difficulties are, no matter what the level of lack of understanding, if one meditates really deeply, one would acquire this quality of the air that becomes, frictionless, become transcendental, and is able to overcome all these challenges, including the not knowing, including all the difficulties that put, that is put in your path to discover this. When you transcend this through this deep introspection, contemplation, meditation, we see that we're able to overcome everything. You know, scars become stars, impossible becomes impossible, challenges become opportunities for learning. And you see that with that kind of quality, we see that we have the power, we have that, ability to be one with nature and ability to live in a much more inspirational and fulfilling life. And this is what this force, which is in all of us, if we understand this force, and if we meditate upon this regularly, we see that our mind absorbs this quality and becomes like this air. Sandoshan.